If you weren't aware, Spotify has come under fire recently for its lucrative relationship with swollen provocateur and comedian Joe Rogan. In addition to looking like a bee sting somehow became an entire human man, also please don't beat me up, Joe, it's just a joke, it's fine. Rogan hosts the most popular podcast in the entire world, the Joe Rogan Experience. Along with compelling podcast titles, Rogan is known for news radio, making people touch bugs, something about fighting people really hard, and most important for this video, his just asking questions bro approach to racism and goofball COVID misinformation, such as baseless conspiracy theories about the pandemic and alternative treatments that are, let's call them, unscientific. Spotify, meanwhile, is hands down the most popular music streaming service out there, boasting 406 million users and 186 million subscribers, nearly a third of all music streaming subscribers. Recently, the platform has begun to pay more attention to podcasts to beef up its subscriber base. So it makes sense that they would throw a gigantic money hat at Joe Rogan's equally gigantic head like some sort of completely smooth carnival ring toss game to woo him over to their platform. Which they did. In 2020, Spotify gave Rogan a cool $100 million, now reported to be worth over $200 million, to be the exclusive home of the Joe Rogan Experience. Cut to today, and Rogan has since been called out by several artists for various degrees of COVID misinformation and casual racism on his show. And while they did pull a great deal of his episodes, Spotify CEO Daniel Ek responded to the controversy by saying that he doesn't believe silencing Joe is the answer. Now, this episode is not about that, or about what the answer could be. But obviously he would say that, because Spotify has been riding the wave of Rogan devotees and COVID shut-ins binging their favorite playlists to boost their net worth to $70 billion in 2021, outperforming every other major streaming entity including Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, and Facebook. Granted, that number has gone down significantly since, Spotify only now worth a piss-poor, embarrassing $30 billion after the controversy. Gee, that is like Tiny Tim money. Though, it's actually quite a lot of money. But despite Spotify making all of those billions, the musical artists who created that massive library of tunes earn an average of $0.00348 per stream, or roughly 1/3 of 1 cent. And while I'm just a humble rude boy, that seems just a teeny weeny bit extremely criminally low. Like, I'm pretty sure you'd make more money if they literally paid in peanuts. You earn your dried leaves and you enjoy them! So let me save you some math. In order to earn what Spotify paid Joe Rogan for the privilege of hosting his weekly show, where he pretty much just gets incredibly high and surfs the web, an artist would need to reach 28,735,632,184 streams. And that meager amount of cash Spotify does pay out, typically, doesn't even go to the artists themselves. It goes to whichever entity owns the master recordings of the song, who will take the lion's share of that third of a cent and pass on whatever table scraps they're legally obligated to toss to the people who actually performed it. Now, why is that such a bad thing? Or more specifically, how is that any shit than the music industry was before streaming? The recording industry, like pretty much every corner of the entertainment industry, is notoriously predacious, built around pressuring or sweet-talking starry-eyed young artists into signing contracts they don't fully understand or don't have the means or clout to negotiate, and handing virtually every potential avenue of income over to the record label. Don't forget, this is the same industry that drove Prince, one of the most celebrated artists of his generation, to change his name to an unpronounceable symbol and write the word slave on his cheek in protest. All this essentially means that, more often than not, all royalties generated by radio play and album sales are going straight into the pockets of gigantic companies like Interscope, RCA, or Atlantic, which are owned by Universal Music Group, Sony, and Warner Music Group, respectively. You know, 3 of the biggest corporate entities in history. Currently, terrestrial radio stations, which are the old-timey, non-streaming grandpa radio stations that still exist, don't pay artists. They're only required to pay songwriter royalties every time they play a song, meaning they only pay whoever is credited with writing it. In many cases, the performer and the songwriter are the same. Every time you hear tub thumping on the radio, you can rest easy knowing that the fine bards of Chumbawamba are being duly compensated. But, unless they also share a songwriting credit, the artist who performs the song gets nothing. It's hard to pin down an exact figure because the music industry smokescreens this information like Batman's search history. Not to mention that the copyright laws that dictate this are over 100 years old. Kind of a lot of things have changed in the past 100 years, such as the music industry and how much money is worth. Streaming services pay royalties to artists, but they were only required by law to do so as of 2018. And as we've mentioned, Spotify, the biggest music streaming platform in the galaxy that we know of, we don't know everything in the galaxy, but probably, pays out at a rate that would be considered a punchline in any other context. And the artists have to split that payment between themselves and whichever corporate entity owns the recording of the song, be it Warner Music or Joe Rogan's gigantic Mars Attacks head. Recently, Spotify all but purged comedy albums from their service after several comedians demanded to be paid royalties as writers. After all, they wrote the jokes they are performing. Spotify had only been paying them as performers, which, as I mentioned a few skankin' seconds ago, is a separate payout that is equally required by law. Spotify made a unilateral decision, as it has a habit of doing, that either comedy albums aren't written or that writing royalties don't count if you're also the performer. So rather than pay comedians and spoken word artists the complete amount of royalties they were due, Spotify just removed their work from the platform. Notably, Joe Rogan, Spotify's #1 comedian and spoken word performer, had not one thing to say about this decision. The point is, the royalty model of radio airplay was already broken and wildly designed to favor corporations over artists, and Spotify has widened that disparity even more at the expense of all but the biggest artists in music. According to one study cited in Business Insider, only about 12% of the annual revenue generated by the music industry actually goes to artists. The rest goes to massive corporate entities like record labels and Spotify, because we've decided that whoever paid for the recording of a timeless song deserves 99% of the financial credit, or 88, or you know my point. Whereas the artists who created the song can't even earn enough from 1 million monthly airplays to pay rent on a 1-bedroom apartment in most cities in America. Spotify set those rates absurdly low for obvious reasons. It lets them massively profit off the work of millions of artists without having to invest much of their own capital or, create anything. But why would the record labels agree to such low royalties? They're the ones who would normally be receiving that money, right? Wouldn't they ask for a bigger piece of the pie for themselves? Well, I'm glad you asked, hypothetical rude person, interrupting me like that, because the answer is that those gargantuan record labels I mentioned earlier, Sony, Universal, and Warner, among a few others, have ownership stakes in Spotify. They own the streaming platform that pays doo-doo rates, and they agreed to do those doo-doo rates because it does mean a bigger piece of that $10 billion Spotify revenue pie. Spotify enables them to pay themselves for airplay and pay the artists as little as possible for their work. Egads! That's a whopping dollop of horse. Hey, thanks for watching that clip. Here's the evergreen end plate to ask you to like and subscribe. It's any day of the year where you are.